My name is Amelia Carter, and whenever someone asks how I became the owner of a $195 million company, and later the house I was once kicked out of, I always begin with the same memory. The little white home on Willow Street in Willow Creek, Colorado. It was an ordinary American home, 2 stories tall with green shutters and a wide maple tree that dropped golden leaves every fall. If you stood on the front porch at sunrise, you could see the mountains glowing pink in the distance. When I was young, I believed it was the safest place on earth, a place where families loved each other and stayed together no matter what. I did not yet know how wrong I would be, or how that house would one day become the symbol of everything I lost, and everything I fought to reclaim. My father, Martin Carter, built his life around his small logistics company, Carter Line Freight. Back then, the entire company fit inside a single worn-down office attached to a garage with 3 old trucks lined up outside. The metal sign above the door rattled whenever the wind blew across Willow Creek, which was often. My father treated that tiny office like a kingdom. He believed he ruled it alone, and he liked it that way. My mother, Grace, was the quiet partner. She kept the books, answered phone calls, managed schedules, and made coffee at 5 every morning for truck drivers who showed up before sunrise. Looking back, I realize she worked harder than anyone, though she never asked for credit. Growing up, I spent more time in that office than in my own bedroom. While other children played in the yard, I traced delivery routes on old maps spread across my father's desk. I learned to calculate fuel costs before I learned to ride a bike. I read contracts before I learned to drive. But my father never believed a daughter should be part of his business. He repeated the same line every time I showed interest. "This is a man's world, Amelia. You should find something calm to do. Maybe teach. Maybe work in a shop." He said those words so often that I used to whisper them under my breath while pretending I didn't care. But in truth, they cut deep. I did not want a calm life. I wanted a big one. I wanted numbers, maps, risk, and responsibility, the very things he tried to hide from me. By the time I turned 16, I could read freight contracts more clearly than half the men my father hired. When I finished college in Denver, I came back home not because Willow Creek called me, but because the company did. I loved it in a way that surprised even me. It felt like a living thing, fragile, stubborn, and full of potential. When I walked through its doors with my cheap laptop and worn-out blazer, I felt something deep in my chest. Not fear, not hope, but determination. The first thing I did was make a deal with my father. "Give me 1 year," I told him. "No salary. If I can't grow the company, I'll walk away." He laughed, thinking I was just a girl looking for a hobby. Still, he agreed. Maybe he believed I needed to fail to understand my place. I never asked him. I didn't want to hear the truth. That year became the hardest and most important year of my early life. I rebuilt the company website by myself, learning every piece of code through late-night tutorials. I reached out to clients in Chicago, Seattle, Dallas, and Detroit, offering faster times, better tracking, and honest communication. I studied trade routes in Europe, especially goods moving from Rotterdam to the eastern ports of America. I formed connections with firms in London and Manchester, learning how to negotiate contracts in both dollars and pounds. Sometimes I worked until my eyes blurred. Sometimes I fell asleep on my keyboard. But every day I pushed forward. Within 2 years, not one, we grew from 3 trucks to 15, then 30. Soon we operated fleets in Ohio, Florida, and Virginia. We opened a small warehouse in Newark. We hired more staff, added new systems, and signed contracts with names my father used to dream about. But whenever something good happened, he refused to give me credit. "It's luck," he would say when I landed a major client. "They like the name," he insisted when we expanded into new regions. Inside, I stayed silent. If I argued, he would only harden. But silence did not mean acceptance. It meant planning. I kept every contract, every email, every document organized with a precision that belonged to someone preparing for something much bigger than a simple office job. The turning point came 12 years after I returned to Willow Creek. Our accountant, Louis Harding, asked me to come into his office. Louis was a kind man with soft gray hair and glasses always slipping down his nose. He was one of the few who treated me as an equal. When I sat down, he turned his screen toward me, and the numbers nearly made my breath stop. "Amelia," he said, "Carter Line Freight is valued at about $195 million. I stared at the screen. For a moment, I didn't believe it. I remembered the rattling sign above our door, the old trucks, the dusty maps, the nights I cried from exhaustion. I remembered every time my father dismissed me. And now, here it was, proof that the company I had nurtured piece by piece had become something real and powerful. When I stepped outside after talking to Louis, the air felt different. The sky looked wider. I walked across the parking lot like someone who had suddenly grown taller. For a few minutes, I allowed myself to believe that my father would finally see me, not as a girl, not as a helper, but as the woman who helped turn his small-town dream into a national force. But I was wrong. I had no idea that the man who should have been proud of me was preparing to do something I never imagined. The next chapter of my life would begin not with celebration, but with betrayal. And it was waiting for me just beyond the holiday lights of a winter evening. Christmas Eve in Willow Creek always carried a certain warmth, the kind that wrapped itself around you like a soft blanket. The snow had fallen early that year, dusting the roofs and turning the streets into quiet silver paths. When I walked into the house on Willow Street, I smelled roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, and pine from the tall Christmas tree standing proudly in the living room. For a moment, just a small, hopeful moment, I allowed myself to believe this holiday might finally bring peace between my father and me. My mother, Grace, moved around the house in her gentle way, touching the ornaments as if they were fragile pieces of memory. She had decorated the tree with silver ribbons and bright red balls that sparkled under the soft yellow lights. In the kitchen, my younger cousin, Lena Moore, was slicing apples for a pie, humming along to the quiet jazz music playing from the old speaker on the counter. Everything looked perfect, peaceful, and familiar. I stood in the doorway watching them work and felt the tiniest bit of hope rising inside my chest. My father, Martin, had been in the living room earlier, checking on the fire in the fireplace and pouring himself a glass of red wine. He was wearing his best gray suit, the one he usually saved for meetings with clients or for family gatherings where he liked to look important. When I saw the slight flush on his cheeks, I knew he had already had a few drinks, but that was normal on holidays. He always said wine helped him relax. For the first time in months, I found myself thinking maybe this year, he will finally say he is proud of me. I had spent 12 years building his small company into something real, something almost impossible for a business that started with 3 old trucks and a metal sign that rattled in the wind. Maybe this Christmas, he would finally see me as something more than the daughter he expected to stay quiet. A little after dinner, when the cousins were finishing dessert and my uncles were arguing about football games on TV, my father clapped his hands loudly. "Everyone into the living room," he said. "I have an announcement. A family matter." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, a mix of nervousness and excitement. I stood near the fireplace as the rest of the family settled onto chairs and couches. The room glowed with Christmas lights, shadows dancing on the walls. My father took another sip of wine, loosened his tie, and scanned the room until his eyes stopped on me. But there was no warmth in his gaze. His eyes were cold, sharp, and strangely empty. "Amelia," he said slowly, "you will leave this house by the end of the week." At first, I truly thought I had misheard him. The room fell painfully silent, so silent that I could hear the crackling of the wood in the fireplace. "What?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin and distant, like it came from a stranger standing behind me. He raised his chin. "You heard me. You are no longer welcome here. This is my house, my rules, and my company. You act like you own everything. You talk to clients as if you run the place. You make decisions without asking me." He turned to the rest of the family as if he were a king making a royal declaration. "I will not have my own daughter trying to take my place. So I am making this clear in front of everyone." My mother lowered her eyes to the carpet. Her hands twisted around one another. She did not argue. She did not speak. Maybe she was afraid of him. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she believed he had the right. To this day, I still don't know what she truly felt in that moment. My face burned. My heart hammered so loudly I almost couldn't hear my own thoughts. I knew we had disagreed many times. We had argued about hiring new drivers, expanding to Newark, opening an office in Portsmouth, and signing new contracts with partners in Europe. But I never believed he would throw me out of our home. Especially not in front of every cousin, uncle, and aunt who had watched me grow up. I spoke carefully, trying to steady my voice. "Dad, I built this with you. I gave 12 years of my life to your company, to our company. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that cut deeper than any words. My company, he said. My house. You work there because I let you. You live here because I allow it. And now I don't. His words knocked the air out of me. In that single moment, I understood something painful and real. I was not his partner, not even in his eyes. I had never been more than a useful tool. Someone to make phone calls, find clients, and solve problems, all while staying quiet and humble. He had never seen me as his equal. I spent that night packing my things. I moved silently through the house that once felt like the center of my world. I put a few clothes into a suitcase, folded my old notebooks carefully, and wrapped my laptop in a scarf so it wouldn't break. I took only one thing from my childhood. A small framed picture of me sitting on the hood of our first company truck when I was 6 years old. I held it to my chest for a long moment before placing it in the bag. The Christmas lights still glowed through the windows when I stepped outside. Snow was falling again, landing softly on my hair and coat. I looked back at the house that had once been my safe place, and felt a strange emptiness settle inside me. My father didn't come to the door. My mother didn't say goodbye. The cold air stung my cheeks, but the ache in my chest hurt far more. I drove through the night to Brighton City, a small coastal town in Massachusetts I had visited only once. The only place I could afford was a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint, a broken heater, and a window facing a dull gray brick wall. The rent was $850 a month, a number that felt impossible for someone who had just been thrown out with almost nothing. That first night in Brighton City, I laid my thin mattress on the floor and stared at the cracked ceiling. My hands were cold. My heart was still burning. I had no shares in the company, no legal rights, no home, no support, but I still had my mind. I still had my experience. I still had the knowledge of every route, every contract, every weakness, and every strength of the business I helped build. My father could take away the house, but he could not take away what I had learned. As the wind howled outside the window, I whispered to myself, if I can build a $195 million company for him, then I can build something for me. And I will never again beg him for a roof or a job. I didn't know it then, but that promise would become the fire that shaped the next 3 years of my life. And someday that fire would burn bright enough for him to see, whether he wanted to or not. When I look back on the 3 years that followed my father's decision to throw me out on Christmas Eve, it feels as though I lived two separate lives, one under the open sky, working hard like any normal consultant trying to survive, and another hidden in the quiet corners of coffee shops and small apartments, building a future that no one, not even my father, could imagine. Those 3 years were lonely, exhausting, and heavy, but they shaped me into someone strong enough to do what needed to be done. During the day, I worked wherever I could. I took consulting jobs from small logistics companies in Cleveland, Richmond, Jacksonville, and a few other American cities I had never planned on visiting. These companies were struggling with outdated systems and messy routes, and even though I had built a $195 million business, I started small with them. $1,500 for a route redesign, $3,000 to help them switch to digital tracking. Sometimes I earned just enough to cover my rent in Brighton City, buy simple groceries, and keep my old laptop working. I traveled with a backpack, a notebook full of ideas, and a determination I kept hidden behind a polite smile. But the nights, those belonged to my secret plan. I spent every evening studying the freight market, reading laws about corporate ownership, and digging through financial records I still had access to. I knew Carter Line freight from the deepest layers. The routes we used, the debts we carried, the contracts that brought us profit, and the clients we hoped would stay loyal. But to take back what I had built, I needed to see the company from the outside too. I needed to understand how banks and investors viewed it, where its weaknesses were, and how someone like me, someone with no support, no family behind her, could become its true owner. That was when I wrote an email to Harold Drake, an old friend from college who had turned into a careful and respected lawyer in Boston. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I explained only a little of what I needed, he suggested we meet in person. We chose a quiet cafe on the north side of Boston, a place that smelled of dark roast coffee and warm pastries. I wore a simple black coat, nothing fancy, and he wore a gray suit that looked too sharp for the small wooden table we sat at. After a moment of silence, Harold pushed his glasses up and asked, Amelia, I read your message. You want to take control of Carter Line Freight. I looked him in the eyes and said the truth I had been holding in for months. I want to own what I built, and I want to do it legally. So I told him everything, how my father kept every share of the company in his name, how he ignored my work, how he humiliated me in front of our whole family, and how I walked away with nothing but knowledge. Harold never interrupted. He took notes on a yellow pad, his face calm and serious. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. You'll need money, he said. A lot of it. To buy shares. To set up a holding company. To buy out silent partners if they exist. And you'll need time. Money was something I didn't have. But time was something life had given me in large amounts whether I wanted it or not. So I worked. Harder than ever. I flew to New York, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, offering my skills to mid-sized freight firms that wanted to modernize. I took a job in London, working for 6 months with a logistics company that needed help connecting its European routes to America. That contract paid £42,000, the biggest amount I had ever earned on my own. I didn't spend a penny more than I needed. No new clothes, no vacations, no dinners in fancy restaurants. I lived like a ghost, moving quietly, saving fiercely, and staying focused. Back in America, Harold helped me set up a holding company in Delaware called Willow Creek Holdings. Seeing the name written out made something in my chest tighten. Willow Creek was the place where everything had begun. The town where I built a business, lost my home, and discovered the truth about what my father thought of me. Naming my holding company after that place made it feel like I was rewriting my story one step at a time. Then came the real work. Harold tracked down old partners and investors, people my father hadn't spoken to in years. Some were in San Diego, some in Portland, and some as far as Glasgow. They were older now, tired, and no longer interested in holding small pieces of a company they didn't understand anymore. Through Willow Creek Holdings, I offered them fair prices for their shares. Sometimes $30,000, sometimes $120,000, and sometimes more. I paid with the money I had saved from consulting in both America and Europe. To my surprise, most of them didn't hesitate. We never hear from Martin anymore, one man told me over the phone. But you sound like the real heart of that company. Those words stayed with me. Piece by piece, share by share, I built a silent foundation, one my father had no idea existed. While I worked on that, I also studied the company's debt, assets, and loan agreements. I met with banks in Charlotte and Pittsburgh and explained my long-term plan without ever mentioning my father's name. I even traveled to Edinburgh, where a private equity manager listened carefully as I explained how I intended to take control of Carter Line Freight. When I finished, he nodded slowly. You know the soul of that business, he said. We can back you if this comes to a serious move. I left his office feeling stronger than I had in years. Still, the journey was filled with stress. Some nights I cried quietly on the mattress in my studio, overwhelmed by fear that everything might collapse. Some days I skipped meals because I needed to save money for legal fees. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered the look on my father's face when he told me to leave his house. I remembered carrying my suitcases through falling snow, and the fire inside me kept burning. Then, near the end of the 3rd year, my phone rang. It was Harold. His voice tried to stay calm, but I heard the excitement underneath. Amelia, he said, with the shares you now control through Willow Creek Holdings, and the option agreements we've secured, you officially have 51% ownership of Carter Line Freight. I sat down on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the wall in disbelief. So, I'm the majority owner, I said softly. Yes, Harold replied. You are the true owner. Your father doesn't know yet. I turned to the window and saw my reflection, tired, thin, older but strong. No longer a girl waiting for approval. A woman who had built her own power with her own hands. Then it's time, I said. I want my house back. And I want my company. The morning everything changed was clear and cold. The kind of morning where the air feels sharp enough to cut through the past. I stood outside the tall glass tower in Cleveland, the new headquarters of Carter Line Freight, with a calmness I had never felt before. The building reflected the pale blue sky, and the silver CLF logo gleamed above the entrance. An emblem I had sketched years ago when dreams still felt simple. Now I was here to claim what I had built, even though no one inside knew it yet. I wore a dark blue suit, the nicest thing I owned after 3 years of careful saving. Beside me walked Harold Drake, steady and composed in his gray suit, and Clara Bennett, the representative from the Edinburgh investment group that had quietly supported my plan. None of us spoke as we stepped through the glass doors into the lobby. The warmth inside felt almost too gentle for the storm that was about to unfold. A young receptionist looked up from her desk, her expression polite but curious. "Good morning," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "Amelia Carter. I'm here to see Martin Carter." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she checked the system and nodded. "He's in a board meeting, but he asked to be told if you came." That surprised me. He must have guessed I'd show up eventually, but he had no idea why. We stood waiting for several quiet minutes. I could hear the faint hum of elevators, the clicking of keyboards, and the distant chatter of employees. For a moment, I wondered if I should have felt nervous. But all I felt was certainty. Then my father walked out of the hallway with 2 board members at his side. He wore a dark suit that was too expensive for the humility he lacked, and a smug smile stretched across his face when he saw me. The last time I had stood before him, he had been throwing me out of his house at Christmas, and now 3 years later he still saw the same girl lost small needing him. "Well, look who it is," he said with a low laugh. "My wandering daughter. How's life in those tiny apartments now?" I met his eyes, refusing to let my face reveal anything. He stepped closer, enjoying the small crowd forming around us. "We actually have a job opening," he said loudly. "Cleaning the loading docks. Dirty work, but honest. Don't worry. I'm giving you a cleaning job. You can start today if you want." One of the board members, Robert Lynch, shifted uncomfortably. The receptionist lowered her eyes. Everyone else waited for my reaction, expecting me to break or cry or plead, but I felt none of that. The sting I once felt had transformed into strength long ago. I stepped forward until I was close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes. Lines formed not from kindness or laughter but from years of pride and stubbornness. Then I said it. "You're fired." The lobby went silent. For a moment my father didn't move. His smile fell away as if someone had wiped it off his face. "What did you say?" he asked, the words cracking around the edges. I opened the black folder I had carried in my hand and removed a stack of documents. Harold stood tall beside me, and Clara remained calm, watching everything with quiet confidence. "I am Amelia Carter, the majority owner of Carter Line Freight," I said. "Through Willow Creek Holdings, I control 51% of this company's shares. These are the contracts. These are the filings. These are the agreements you never knew existed. As of last month, you are no longer the owner. I am." I handed the documents to Robert Lynch, whose eyes widened as he scanned the pages. Harold's voice followed mine, firm and clear. "Mr. Carter, as of this morning, the board has been legally restructured according to ownership. A vote has already been filed. You have been removed as CEO. Ms. Carter is now the CEO of Carter Line Freight. You are by law dismissed." My father's face went from flushed red to chalk white. "This is a joke," he said, turning to the board members. "Tell them this is a joke. You can't do this. This is my company." I shook my head gently. "It was our company, but you threw me out of your home, out of your life, and tried to erase every hour I spent building this place. You never thought I would find the money or the partners or the law, but I did." He snapped at the receptionist. "Call security." But no one moved. Clara stepped forward. "Our group supports Miss Carter," she said calmly. "Our funding is tied to her leadership, not yours." My father's shoulders sagged. For the first time in my life, he looked small, like a man who had built walls so high he couldn't see them fall. He pointed a trembling hand at me. "After everything I gave you," he whispered, "you do this." I kept my voice soft. "You gave me a roof and then you took it back. I gave you 12 years and you tried to shame me in front of our family. I'm not taking revenge. I'm taking back what I built." He looked around, but no one stepped forward to save him. Finally, he turned and walked out the glass doors, disappearing into the bright morning without looking back. That evening, I sat at the head of the long boardroom table. The city lights of Cleveland glowed through the windows. For the first time, the chair felt like it belonged to me. But my journey wasn't finished. A week later, I drove to Willow Creek. The house on Willow Street looked exactly the same. Snow on the porch, green shutters, the familiar maple tree, but now I held the keys. I had bought the house from the bank after my parents fell behind on their loans. My mother opened the door, her face older, her eyes soft. "Amelia," she whispered. "This house is mine now," I said gently. "You can stay as long as you want. You will never be kicked out." Tears slid down her cheeks. "And your father?" "He has his own road," I said. "But he will never again decide where I live or what I own." That night I slept in my old room, no longer a symbol of pain but a reminder of what I had reclaimed. People often ask how I survived it all, how I built a $195 million company, lost everything, and took it back. I tell them this: I fought when no one saw, learned when no one believed, and rose when the person I trusted most tried to crush me, and in the end, I didn't just fire my father. I freed myself from him.